Hi, everyone. We'll get started shortly. We're just waiting for folks to get brought into the meeting, but we'll get started here in a bit. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this special Sustainable Community Development Network Policy Connection on Vitalizing Justice40 Opportunities. My name is Matt Mahoney, the Director of Government Affairs. This presentation will be recorded, and the materials will be shared after the program. And also, if you have questions throughout the presentation today, please encourage you to use the Q&A box or the chat function to ask a question. Just jumping into who Sustainable Pittsburgh is and what we're about. Sustainable Pittsburgh is committed to building the knowledge, perspective, and ability needed to create a better tomorrow for our region. We're optimistic, having worked with nearly 1,000 businesses and communities and organizations to take action, using our customized frameworks to track progress and simultaneously advance social equity, environmental stewardship, and prosperity. That's why we've asked you all here today as part of the Sustainable Community Development Network to learn together so we can act together. And together is how we co-create a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous Southwestern Pennsylvania. For today's agenda, we're going to start off with a quick update, as we usually do, on the Sustainable Pennsylvania program with our new programs director, Kelly Henderson. And then next, I'm going to set the stage for today's discussion on vitalizing Justice40 opportunities in Pennsylvania and discuss some of the data that we've dug into to better understand Pennsylvania's Justice40 profile. Then we'll move to a presentation by Matthew Tejada, the Deputy Administrative Director for Environmental Justice within US EPA's National Program for Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. Who'll cover a variety of climate and environmental justice programs. Next, we'll have Justin Dula from Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection in the Office of Environmental Justice, who will provide a deeper background on environmental justice in Pennsylvania, as well as some updates on the environmental justice policy and tools to help identify environmental justice communities. And then last, we'll leave some time for Q&A, and please also use the chat to ask questions for more information on a certain topic. Now, as promised, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Kelly, who's going to provide a quick overview of our Sustainable Pennsylvania program. And we're excited because over the past few years, we've worked really hard to update this program, and we want to provide you all with a brief update and overview. Kelly?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Kelly Henderson, and for those of you that are regulars on the SCDN Policy Connection webinars, I'm new to Sustainable Pittsburgh, almost a month in now, as the Director of Programs. As Matt mentioned, I'm going to provide a quick overview of the Sustainable Pennsylvania program, which has been in place for nearly a decade. The Pennsylvania Municipal League and Sustainable Pittsburgh have been working together to help Pennsylvania municipalities realize the benefits of sustainability by jointly administering the Sustainable PA certification program. Pennsylvania's local leaders have a profound role in advancing quality of life and access to opportunities in their communities. Using sustainability as a strategic framework helps municipalities achieve these goals. That's why the Sustainable Pennsylvania program covers a comprehensive set of sustainability topics and provides step-by-step guidance for how your community can advance its performance in areas including waste and materials management, economic development and revitalization, energy, land use and housing, municipal operations, and many more areas and issues. Next slide, please. The Sustainable Pennsylvania program offers several benefits. It can help you baseline your municipality's current sustainability performance, as well as serve as an action plan for advancing your sustainability performance. To help you advance your progress, the program also offers resources, tools, and best practices. Getting certified helps your community be recognized as a leader in sustainability. You will receive a promotional kit, which includes a badge for inclusion on your website, job postings, or other uses, and a press release template. We'll also share your achievement over social media. Participation in this program can also help you resource your sustainable development initiatives and provide a platform for interested stakeholders to engage. Sustainable Pennsylvania is also recognized on the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development's municipal funding applications, which can help your funding application stand out. Next slide, please. There are just 4 steps to getting certified. First, you need to create an account on the Sustainable Pennsylvania online program portal. Next, answer all the questions in the program. The program takes the form of an online assessment, and the questions are customized for municipalities. You can work with a team of colleagues to complete this, which would be a great way to help organize a sustainability team at your municipality. Third, after you complete your assessment and submit it, our staff will provide feedback on your responses that you'll have a chance to address before submitting your final answers. And last, you'll earn a bronze, silver, gold, or platinum certification level based on 2 criteria. 1, the total percentage of possible points you earn, and 2, whether you've completed the actions required for each level. Next slide. As for certification timeline, there's no deadline for finishing this program, so you can earn your certification at your own pace. And although there's no deadline to participate, there is one special opportunity available only through late November to municipalities in Armstrong, Butler, Fayette, Greene, Indiana, Lawrence, and Washington counties. Municipalities located in one of these counties working to earn Sustainable Pennsylvania certification can be eligible to apply for an energy and cost savings grant of up to $3,000 with rolling applications accepted through November 20th. Once any municipalities are certified in any county, the certification will last for 3 years. But you don't need to wait for your certification to expire before you seek a new one. You can log back into your account at any time to view your saved answers and update them to seek a higher certification level. After your first submission, you won't have to re-answer every question each time you resubmit. Join the 126 certified municipalities in Pennsylvania, which collectively serve 3.9 million residents in supporting healthy residents, building vibrant communities, and advancing environmentally responsible practices. Next slide. So what are the next steps? We hope you'll get started by making an account in our system. Visit sustainablepa.org and click Login or Start Certification at the top right of the page. Also, stay tuned for the launch of a friendly competition called a carbon reduction sprint coming later this fall. In the sprint, you'll compete against peers to earn points for actions that advance carbon emissions reductions. Earlier this year, we wrapped up our first sprint, which was focused on social equity. In the social equity sprint, the city of Scranton came in as the top scorer for municipalities, with Millersburg Borough as the runner-up. Congrats to Scranton and Millersburg. Sprints can be a great introductory step to getting fully certified through Sustainable Pennsylvania, as the actions you'll take as part of the sprint are the same ones that you'd work on for full designation, just with the actions specific to a particular category, like carbon reduction, pulled out and highlighted. Any one of us on the Sustainable Pittsburgh team are always available and happy to meet with anyone interested in learning more, whether it's about the full designation with Sustainable Pennsylvania or about the carbon reduction sprint. Thanks, and now I'm going to pass it back to Matt to continue through our agenda.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was great. And I strongly encourage anybody that's interested in learning more about the certification program for Sustainable Pennsylvania to get in touch with Kelly, get in touch with anybody on the Sustainable Pittsburgh team to help you get started. So jumping into the content for today's policy connection, focusing on vitalizing Justice40 opportunities so we can learn more about what the Justice40 initiative may mean for your municipality and how to access funding and tools available to address a variety of environmental justice needs. So before we kick off, let's talk about what the Justice40 initiative is. Justice40 is a national initiative that calls for at least 40% of the benefits from certain federal investments to be directed to communities overburdened by social, environmental, and economic distress. Communities experiencing flooding, high energy costs, poor indoor plumbing, high asthma rates, transportation barriers, and many other types of burdens are being prioritized for over 450 Justice40 covered programs across 17 federal agencies. And to meet these goals of the Justice40 initiative, federal agencies have transformed hundreds of federal programs to ensure disadvantaged communities receive the benefits of the many new and existing federal programs across several priority categories. So legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the American Rescue Plan Act, all include funding opportunities for environmental justice programs, and these investments will help confront decades of underinvestment in disadvantaged communities. So as part of the Justice40 initiative, it applies to federal programs, as I mentioned, that address these 7 key areas that will be repeated throughout this presentation. So it's important to recognize what these priority areas are. These priorities include climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transportation, sustainable housing, remediating legacy pollution, drinking water infrastructure, and workforce development across these fields. So for some examples of the types of projects that are eligible under these categories, some examples of programs made available focus on climate change are those that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions or assist in the development of community resilience plannings for climate change, as well as technical assistance to provide support for engaging disadvantaged communities on climate change issues. And there's also flood mitigation funding and funding to mitigate urban heat island effects. Under clean transportation, that would include funding for programs that improve public transportation accessibility and reliability, also reduce exposure to transportation-related emissions, such as air quality monitoring projects and mobility assessments to improve access to clean transportation. Affordable housing and sustainable housing means programs that help reduce displacement, improve indoor air quality, reduce housing cost burdens, and reduce abandoned or vacant homes. For remediation, Pennsylvanians should already start to be seeing some of the programs for abandoned mine land programs making an impact, as Pennsylvania has disproportionately high number of abandoned mine lands and orphaned wells throughout the state. In fact, we have about 1/3 of the nation's abandoned mine lands are in Pennsylvania, and approximately 43 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties are impacted by abandoned mine lands. So those that are, especially communities that are in the midst of the energy transition. Clean water infrastructure, replacement of lead lines. These are examples of different programs under clean water. And then capstoning each of these is a training and workforce development, which is also a priority under Justice40, increasing participation in the jobs that are made available by these investments in clean energy job training in disadvantaged communities, and targeting formerly incarcerated and youth transitioning out of foster care. So there's lots of different programs that are available, and taking a look at how the federal agencies decided to parse out those programs, we'll see a breakdown here on this slide of those 450 programs across 17 federal agencies. Now, this list has been updated as of April 21st, 2023. It's in version 1.4. There's continuous iterations of this list based on those 7 categories that I mentioned: climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transportation, sustainable housing, remediating legacy pollution, drinking water, and workforce development. Existing and new programs that are covered under these investments are considered Justice40 covered programs, and as such, we expect this list to evolve. You'll notice that the Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, and Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior have a high number of programs, which shouldn't be surprising given those 7 priority areas that were mentioned earlier. And what we're hoping to see is more programs in departments like the Housing and Urban Development, Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, and Department of Labor begin making connections between their programs and existing environmental justice needs. As an example, a few examples from that covered list. This is not an exhaustive list, just to provide a flavor of some of the more specific programmatic or programs that are being funded. Taking a look at the USDA, for example, the USDA is engaged in a department-wide strategy to put agriculture, forestry, and rural America in a leadership role in addressing climate change and sustainability, tracking benefits of those investments with a commitment to doing right by underserved communities through the Justice40 initiative. USDA has identified covered programs under the Justice40 initiative that are housed in USDA's 8 mission areas: farm production, research, education and economics, rural development, and natural resources and the environment. So you can see the USDA, as well as Department of Human Services, Department of Energy, have activated several different types of programs. And just another list, again, I won't go through these, but one thing that I hope you'll take away is there isn't just one type of environmental justice issue that's being addressed through the Justice40 initiative. There's a wide variety, a wide scope of critical health needs, of critical environmental needs that are being addressed through or being prioritized through Justice40. So one of the primary tools that's being used by the federal government to identify those disadvantaged communities is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. It's a consistent tool used across each of these programs. It's not exclusive. It's not used exclusively, but is used consistently across federal agencies and is commonly referred to. The tool categorizes burdens into various categories based on those earlier categories that I mentioned. And those categories help identify where disadvantaged impacts are being realized. So the map uses census tract data to identify where disadvantaged communities are. And census tracts, just for everybody's background, census tracts are statistical areas determined by the U.S. Census Bureau every 10 years and are small plots of land, not at the size of a county, sometimes at the size of a township, but often overlap jurisdictions. With this map, the tool helps rank those burdens using percentiles, and percentiles show how much burden each tract is experiencing compared to other tracts. So the tool is useful for helping to compare between different census tracts on what types of impacts are being felt. Taking a closer look at Pennsylvania, according to this tool, Pennsylvania has over 3 million residents who live in areas defined as disadvantaged. For reference, the population of Pennsylvania is about 12 million, 12,700,000, 12,800,000, give or take. So 3 million residents in Pennsylvania are identified as living in disadvantaged communities. 883 of our over 3,000 census tracts are identified as disadvantaged. And the total number of burdens is over 4,000, with about 5 burdens per tract. Now, if we're taking this data and looking a little bit closer at the county level, as I mentioned, these issues don't persist at a county or a specific government jurisdiction line. They're based on census tracts, but taking a look using the county parameters, we took a look and found what the top 3 burdens that were being experienced by these counties or communities in these counties. And we found that energy costs, asthma, lead paint, and transportation barriers were top barriers across Pennsylvania and most other areas of Pennsylvania. This is concentrated in southwestern Pennsylvania. And although this is being, again, presented by the county, it's important that this is not the experience of the entire county. But when we look at the data and we look at the maps, we'll see where those most impacted areas are. It's mostly in urbanized areas where there are small towns. We see higher concentrations, but this isn't a consistent pattern. There's not really a consistent pattern that can be surmised. And we can expect that those burdens will change as programs are funded and as more information continues rolling out. So as we're researching these opportunities, it can be difficult to see the forest through the trees, but that's what Sustainable Pittsburgh is aiming to do. So we've taken a lot of this data and put it into a more user-friendly format to help us identify census tracts and where burdens are being faced, and with the intent of helping build capacity of local governments that are in need of support. So if you're interested in learning more about what Justice40 may mean for your community, please reach out to us at Sustainable Pittsburgh, and we'll help connect you with the data and resources that we're taking a look at. So just to leave you with a few recommendations, some cities, some municipalities are aligning their planning efforts with Justice40 to leverage federal opportunities. Some are using Justice40 to initiate discussions on addressing housing equity, inequity, clean energy, and legacy pollution. So this Justice40 can be used to start the conversation and also help integrate into existing programs. Another key recommendation: involve the community in the process. It's an essential part of the success of any program, but Justice40 requires meaningful, authentic engagement. And engagement is best when it's early and often. So starting the conversation now would help in advancing environmental justice issues. And also, there's a lot of data out there, and to assist local governments in assessing the community. Census tract data is helpful, a lot of federal tools, but there's not an exclusive tool. There's a wide range of different demographic, environmental, health outcome, economic indicators, lots of different tools that are available, and encourage everybody to seek out those tools that are most appropriate. And there are a number of different governance models that local governments can use to implement Justice40 goals. We're working groups on climate emergency mobilization or equity advisory committees, climate equity steering committees, Justice40 oversight committees. We know that community planning and implementation of Justice40 that address community needs will not happen on its own, and each community must find their own mode to get it right. But these are just some of the recommendations that we found that would be helpful. So to give a flavor of what's the Environmental Protection Agency is providing, we've invited Matthew Tejada, the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Environmental Justice at the US EPA, to talk a little bit more about some of the programs that are being offered by the EPA. So Matthew, if you wouldn't mind joining us and providing that overview for us.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm actually given what you just presented, which was a lot, and it was great. I mean, a lot of really on-point information, a lot of it contextualized for Pennsylvania, which is really awesome. I just wanted to emphasize a few points to make it real clear for folks, right? It has been really tough to get folks to understand that Justice40 is not a pot of money, right? It is, as Matt showed, it's over 400 programs across the federal government. And what it is pushing us to do is to ensure that the benefits of those programs, including just the investments, including just the dollars, but not limited to the dollars, right? But really pushing that the benefits of those programs go to certain places on a map. So you have to think about, right, it's not just the investments of your project or program, it's the benefits of them. And in a lot of these programs, especially if you're dealing in big infrastructure programs, if you're looking at things like, you know, cleaning up contamination in a watershed, you know, think about where do those benefits potentially spread, right? Who enjoys those benefits? You need, you know, and that's not an invitation to, you know, drive a truck through a loophole in the policy, but it is really to think about, you know, what do the benefits of each of these programs provide? And what is the benefit of your project in applying to or using one of those programs? What is it actually going to achieve? And going back to, you know, to really emphasize something that Matt shared, the engagement of the impacted community is absolutely critical, not only in ensuring that your project or your program actually has the impact you want it to, but to really tease out, right? What do those communities that are most impacted and that are disadvantaged, you know, what do they want to see from those programs? And starting with that conversation at the very first instance of trying to figure this out, to hear from the community, to involve them in it, and not just, you know, not just the typical way of us kind of checking in with the community and going off and doing our thing, but really involving the community in your project, right? Really thinking about things like shared governance, really having them advise and be partners, like real partners in the project, not just, hey, we need a letter of support for this application, but really make them be partners in your projects. It is critical. In the EJ programs that we have, and we're going to have a big EJ program, a big EJ grant, a $2 billion grant come out in October is our goal. It's actually local government can't get the grant unless the community is partnered with them. The community is really going to be the one that is critical, is fundamental to just the eligibility of a proposal being considered by us. The community has got to be present. So really do take that to heart, that involvement of the community is critical. I wanted to share real quickly, I'm not going to share the presentation I was thinking of. I'm just going, oh, can I share my screen? It says I can't. Oh, I'm going to share another one though. Can you pull that one down? I wanted to do something else if I could. But I can't share if something's being shared. Thank you. So I just wanted to share real quickly as a tool for folks to be able to reference. So Matt was talking about that climate and economic justice screening tool. So there is a website, you can find it. We call it CJEST, lovingly Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool. It does operate at the census tract level. It does have a lot of different factors, and Matt had that chart that kind of looked at the different factors that determine which different tracts in CJEST are determined to be disadvantaged, right? You don't necessarily have to line up, well, if this census tract is disadvantaged for this reason, does our proposal have to match that reason? You don't. Once a census tract is lit up for Justice40 purposes, it is a disadvantaged community. It is one of the communities that all of us across the federal government, we're trying to ensure that at least 40% of the benefits of our programs go to those places. Okay, so, but remember that, right? Because that's that's looking for those programs with a bunch of benefits, and we're still working on what those benefits are. Investments are real easy, right? Dollars are pretty easy and consistent, but there's other things in addition to that. We're still working on what are those benefits. I know it'd be a huge help to applicants out there to know what benefits we're looking for to include in your applications. That's not likely to happen by the time most of these applications come in. So the more that you all can think about the benefits of your programs, making those crystal clear in applications, and then connecting them to those benefits actually flowing to disadvantaged communities on the CGIST map is one way to try to lift up your application, right? Because every program is going to be looking for, you know, the ability to meet that goal of at least 40%, right? But it's just 40%. One thing to consider is that, especially in the Inflation Reduction Act, it used that same terminology. It used disadvantaged community. It did not point to the climate economic justice screening tool. The Inflation Reduction Act actually gave the secretary or the administrator of every agency the power to define disadvantaged communities for the Inflation Reduction Act programs. And in some instances, the Inflation Reduction Act said 100% has to go to the disadvantaged community. So that's a different thing. So Justice40 is really looking at the back end of things, right? We're trying to hit this goal that we would do as projects actually deploy, kind of as a reporting thing, that at least 40% of the benefits went to the places that the CGIST map created. There's going to be other programs, and you know, Matt's call out to, there's lots of different tools out there. You really have to look at each program from each agency and have some dexterity to go between different tools is really important, because we have a tool at EPA, HHS has a tool, Department of Transportation has a tool. There's different things out there when you're looking, you know, upstream, and you're actually looking at like eligibility requirements for a lot of different tools. There's going to be some variability there, right? And that climate economic justice screening tool might be present in a lot of those, but there's going to be some variability in terms of the actual eligibility for different programs. So Justice40 is kind of an endpoint at the end of these programs for reporting purposes, but the beginning points aren't all the same. So what I'm showing you here is our EJ Screen tool at EPA, and I would invite you, if you're struggling with, well, which tool do I use? I would really invite you to start with EJ Screen. It's been out there the longest in the federal government. The only tool really that is older than it is the Cal Enviro Screen, specific to California. And a lot of the tools that have been created, including CGIST, are really using a lot of EJ Screen. EJ Screen is kind of a backbone for a lot of these other screening tools that are out there. And once you learn how to use EJ Screen and what's going on in EJ Screen, it's pretty easy to switch into some of these other tools and say, oh, I see, they're doing this in CGIST, and oh, I see, HHS, you know, they're doing a lot of this EJ Screen stuff, but they're also pulling in this other data and mixing it in there, and it gives a slightly different result, right? So I'd really encourage folks to learn some facility with EJ Screen. And just for everyone's information, we do already have in EJ Screen, if you go to the Places tab, like I just did, and of course we're looking at Pittsburgh here, right? We actually have a Justice40 layer. So you can pull up just CGIST all by itself, and it'll load slowly. I've got a lot of the map lit up here. Let me zoom in a little bit more on Pittsburgh. It'll eventually, oh, it says the service not available. You're kidding me. So it's down just for a moment. But you can look at Justice40 all by itself, or you can do our disadvantaged definition for Inflation Reduction Act programs. I know this gets a little nuanced, right? But because the Inflation Reduction Act gave Administrator Regan the authority and the mandate to set the disadvantaged community definition, we are using CGIST. So CGIST is completely contained within this. But we've also brought in some additional EJ Screen layers. So we've got a bigger map than just CGIST alone. So when you're looking at EPA IRA programs, you should really be looking at this layer in EJ Screen to see, and we're actually operating on the block group level, so it's even more granular. It's going to get into more places than just CGIST did alone. This is the tool that we're going to use primarily at EPA for judging eligibility for programs for IRA. Another thing to understand, another nuance, and I promise I'm not doing this on purpose, it's just a fairly complicated space to try to operate in, is this is for geographically defined communities, right? So if you were thinking about, just, neighborhoods, then you're going to think about them as geographically defined places, and you're going to use these tools. Justice40 and the Inflation Reduction Act and everything else recognize that some communities aren't geographically defined, right? Indigenous communities, well, some indigenous communities have tribal lands, they have a reservation, so you can map that, but not all of their community lives in that place, right? Their community can be everywhere. Farm workers. Farm workers, it's hard to map. Farm workers are largely migrant, right? They live kind of in corners and in pockets of other communities. So if you have a project that was doing something for like farm workers, you would just describe that community as the one that is going to receive the benefit of your program. You say that's a non-geographically defined community, and here's the benefits, and here's, characterize that community as well as you can, but it's a non-geographically defined community. So be really careful as you're making your way into these Justice40 programs from across the federal government. Really look upstream, right? Look at what tools do different agencies have available, and are they specifically tying eligibility, or are they urging the use of those tools to help characterize the communities that will receive the benefits of your program? Watch out if it's a geographically defined community or not, but really lean in on what do you think the benefits, not just the dollars, but what do you think the other benefits of your program will be? Where will the benefits of those activities flow out across the United States, and then, or across Pennsylvania or the Pittsburgh area, and then make that connection to, if it's there, to those disadvantaged communities. And again, it is completely to your advantage, and we are very, very strongly urging, if not requiring, that the community be a partner in figuring that out. Right. And in figuring out, well, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve from your program? What are the benefits that are most important? Where will those benefits accrue? Having that community involvement from the first instance and really helping to craft and steer that proposal and the project will only benefit the competitiveness of your program being considered by any federal agency, because that is what we are all essentially looking for. And I'm so sorry I can't stay longer and stay for question and answer. I got to bolt to another meeting that started a few minutes ago, but I really appreciate the time. And I think Matt is going to try to collect any questions for me and shoot them to me, and I will get back to folks by email.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matthew. Great points. I just want to highlight a few of them. Absolutely, dexterity. Amongst having dexterity and ensuring, you can cross-pollinate and think across different programs and different agencies is incredibly important. Engaging the community, I can absolutely attest to reading through the many different programs that requiring engagement, and having authentic, meaningful engagement programs that support those initiatives is absolutely paramount. And lots of good points made by Matthew. So he had to bolt, but if you do have questions, we can help connect folks afterwards, after this presentation. But next, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Justin Dula, as I share my screen, and hopefully you can see the title screen there. But we're joined by Justin Dula today, who is the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, focusing on outreach to communities facing disproportionate environmental impacts. Justin started with the office in 2008 as the Eastern Regional Coordinator and worked his way up, which allowed him to work with a variety of communities ranging from historic towns in anthracite coal country to suburban communities near Philadelphia across Pennsylvania. So Justin formerly served as the manager of the community and regional planning at the Delaware County Planning Department, and continued to work on the built environment, and is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. So thank you so much, Justin, for joining us to talk more about environmental justice.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to everyone about this, and I'm before diving right into the funding, going to start a little bit with some background on DEP and environmental justice, and then jump into a little bit more about some tools we have in our updated environmental justice policy. So on to the next slide. DEP's mission is to protect Pennsylvania's air, land, and water from pollution and provide for the health and safety of citizens. It's a large mission that DEP as a regulatory agency can't do on its own. But next slide shows part of DEP's vision under Secretary Nigrin has 4 pillars, which includes environmental justice as one of the key pillars of the agency. On to the next slide. Through that, a lot of emphasis has been put into the Office of Environmental Justice, increasing staff in order to achieve the goal and mission, working with communities to do proactive community engagement and make sure the first time communities are interacting with DEP isn't around a controversial permit or an environmental emergency. And then also updating our environmental justice policy and creating a mapping tool that I think is very useful in meeting Justice40 and other federal funding goals as a side, which I'll talk about in a little bit. On to the next slide. But just to create a base level of conversation, I think a lot of folks have seen a slide like this, trying to get some key definitions around equality, equity, and justice, which we use. The goal in this particular image or example is to see a baseball game. The goal of DEP is that cleaner air, land, and environment. But not everyone's able to achieve that goal due to historic inequities shown through the sloping ground, as well as current institutional and other barriers shown through the sloping fence. Equality treats everyone the same and everyone gets the same number of resources, and still people aren't able to achieve the goal. With an equity focus, you give people the resources they need to be able to achieve the goal. And at its base, the focus on justice tries to give people the resources they need through equity, but also works to eliminate those systematic barriers so that people are able to achieve the goal with fewer resources in the future. So on to the next slide. When we talk about the historic inequities that, as Matthew said, Justice40 is trying to address, as well as DEP's programs that I'm about to talk about, and was shown in the sloping ground in that last slide. A very visible example, but hardly the only example, is a history of redlining. This was a process in the 30s, 40s, and 50s where the government would draw, government agencies would survey cities, including Pittsburgh, and draw literal red lines around areas where investment was to be discouraged because they were considered hazardous. And this was often explicitly because of race, income, class, or environmental burdens faced by the communities there. On to the next slide. Through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, explicit discrimination was made illegal, and this was the first of multiple non-discrimination laws passed both at the federal and state level that create the legal basis behind the environmental justice activities that agencies now operate on. On to the next slide. But as we saw the environmental movement take hold in the 70s and laws get passed like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, we didn't always see these equitably enforced. On to the next slide. This shows some key historic movements around environmental justice. And again, folks will have these slides, and just given the timing, I won't go into detail in these. But I think one of the key points is the way communities have worked to help shape their visions around environmental justice, and the way that government entities have responded based on a legal basis have worked together, but aren't always the same. And there is no one set agreed upon definition for environmental justice. So how regulatory agencies like EPA or the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection talk about environmental justice is often different than the way that community advocates will talk about environmental justice. On to the next slide. Within the city of Pennsylvania, there's also an environmental justice movement that took shape. Residents of the city of Chester really spurred the Department of Environmental Protection to create an environmental justice work group to help address environmental justice that led to recommendations and led DEP to create an environmental justice policy that's been in effect since 2004, which we are now updating. On to the next slide. This timeline, and again, folks will have this slide to look at this. Items in black are the federal and other state responses around environmental justice, and items in blue are Pennsylvania specific. On to the next slide. And really, there is a science behind environmental justice that relates to disproportionate environmental and health impacts faced by communities facing environmental injustice. All environmental injustice is a force multiplier that has multiple factors being faced by communities and creates multiple vulnerabilities within communities. These can't be addressed by only one agency or one particular group. So it's important that we all work together to help address those. And I think that leads to the point behind the Justice40 initiative, trying to bring together multiple different agencies and multiple different funding streams to help address environmental injustice. On to the next slide. So as I mentioned, DEP has had an environmental justice public participation policy since 2004. That policy has focused on the permitting process and encouraging enhanced public participation through that process. On to the next slide. We have been working on updating this policy for a few years now. So we did an initial draft that continued to focus on public participation in the permitting process. Heard from communities that we should really look at what we could do beyond that. So then we started a dialogue working actively with community leaders and community groups and focus groups to create a more comprehensive updated policy that we could enact under existing statute and regulation here at DEP. On to the next slide. That policy that we have created has been adopted as interim final as of 10 days ago on September 16th. So we're operating under that policy that's been through 2 public comment periods, but we're having another public comment period as a chance to improve that policy. So you can comment at one of our virtual hearings, at in-person hearings, including one October 18th in Pittsburgh. On to the next slide. We're also accepting written comments, and written comments carry the same weight as verbal comments provided at hearings. And you can do this through our e-comment tool or by emailing e-comment or sending a physical letter to the address shown on the slide. To the next slide. This EJ policy includes 9 different components. Again, we really tried to look at everything the agency does around environmental justice and what we were able to engage with through a policy lens. On to the next slide. It includes a specific section that talks about where our policy applies, and that led to the creation of the Penn EnviroScreen tool, which I think is also useful in helping create that local understanding around environmental justice that Matt talked about, that you can also use on EPA or other federal applications to meet Justice40 goals. On to the next slide. As I mentioned too, we're also actively looking at proactive community engagement. Amelia Benson is the regional coordinator in the Southwest region and is working to do additional outreach so that we're able to to speak with communities before they're seeing a controversial project. On to the next slide. But we do continue to have enhanced public participation as part of our process. And we've kind of streamlined how that process works and added more detail. On to the next slide. We have seen success through this process since 2004. So we did want to keep it and sort of build on those success and ensure that we continue to have public participation. On to the next slide. But moving beyond just beyond the permitting process, we also looked at where we had opportunities in the inspections, compliance, and enforcement realm under policy to be able to consider environmental justice. So we don't have a new statute or regulation that would require legislative action, but there are places within inspections, compliance, and enforcement where we are able to consider environmental justice. On to the next slide. This policy also puts in writing work that we've been doing for a while to target our grant funding at the state level through DEP to communities facing environmental justice issues. So that's now in our policy and is included in grants. On to the next slide. And then also of interest to this group, I think, is a focus on climate initiatives and considering how environmental justice can be considered in the climate work that DEP does, which is another one of our pillars, because communities facing environmental justice issues are often the first communities feeling the effects of climate change. On to the next slide. I'd mentioned we've had a policy since 2004, and that included a mapping tool we called EJ Areas Viewer to identify where that policy applied. On to the next slide. But we looked to create a better, more useful tool. There's been a lot more data available and more regularly updated since 2004. And we were able to look at models like EJ Screen that Matthew mentioned, and Callan-Byros Screen, which he also mentioned, in order to get a better tool that could identify environmental justice in Pennsylvania. On to the next slide. So we did an analysis of other states in the federal government to see how they were calculating environmental justice issues, and it generally worked on a formula that was a risk based on pollution burden characteristics or threat, and population characteristics or vulnerability. So the next slide shows that we adopted that formula for Pennsylvania with the Callan-Byros Screen tool. And on to the next slide. We used percentiles of 32 individual factors, grouping them into those population characteristics and pollution burden characteristics to ensure that no one individual factor pushed an area into being of consideration for environmental justice, that it really needed to be multiple overlapping environmental burdens or vulnerabilities the communities were facing in order to be included in our policy. And I think that reaches the spirit of Justice40 and a lot of the efforts there, and might provide good data and applications for those projects as well. On to the next slide. All of this is to say, I don't expect anyone to know all the formulas, but they are all there. We have a 140 plus page methodology document that explains rationale for including each of these, all of the original data sources, as well as the analysis that was done so that folks can recreate it. Those who have access to GIS are able to download the percentile layers that we use so that you can consider them in your own analysis. And then this methodology document also links to the original data sources if you want to see any of those. On to the next slide. When you log into the Callan-Byros screen, which unfortunately is currently down, our GIS section is doing some maintenance right now. but hopefully it will be back up soon. You'll see a map. Instead of focusing on our environmental justice policy and what's in or out, you see a full map showing the whole state of Pennsylvania, with those areas that are darker blue being those that have a higher Penn Enviro screen score, which means they're experiencing more environmental burden or population vulnerability. And then those that are lighter and going to the yellow or beige are lower than the percentile average for Pennsylvania. On to the next slide. But if you are filling out a grant application or applying for a permit, there's a theme box on the right where you can just go to the Penn Enviro screen score and see what DEP is considering, which is the top 20% is our focus. But again, having this full tool available can help you in meeting Justice40 goals as well, because you're able to look at 40% or above on our mapping tool. On to the next slide. Just wrapping it up before we get to questions with our contact information. So these are folks in central office or working statewide in Harrisburg. And then up next is, on our next slide, is our regional coordinators. So as I mentioned, Amelia Benson is the main contact for folks in the Southwest. And as I know, this has a broader audience. You know, these are the contacts for the regional coordinators at Office of Environmental Justice throughout. So thanks again for letting me present.
Thanks so much, Justin. That was fantastic, and a great overview of a lot of information coming from Pennsylvania. And it's great to see. I'll say that it's great to see Pennsylvania taking receiving so many comments and making the updates to the EJ policy for Pennsylvania. I'm interested. What are some of the you had mentioned community development and investment, targeting grants and promoting brownfield development in one of your slides. I was wondering if are we starting to see some of that overlap or utilizing or leveraging Justice40 rather in a way that helps target programs for communities that are in most need, in alignment with some of the federal programs that we're starting to see roll out?
Yeah, so I think there's a few ways that this can happen. I think the Justice40 initiatives opens federal grants to a lot of people who weren't eligible to apply before. So now community-based organizations, municipalities, and nonprofits can apply for types of grants that they've never been able to apply for before. So we have been trying to work to help assist in some of that process, help them get familiar with some of the federal guidelines and be a partner with them in some of those aspects. But we as the state are also looking to apply for funds and looping in those community-based organizations and nonprofits on our grant applications. So we definitely have a lot of applications out there, and I think the process is still moving where we haven't heard yet on ones we've received for a while.
Right. Yeah, I completely understand. There's a lot of different funding streams that are flowing in multiple directions right now. But it's great to hear that Pennsylvania's Office of Environmental Justice is being a meaningful part of that conversation, especially as it comes to Justice40 and supporting local governments, providing tools like the Penn Enviro Screen tool, and working with local communities on climate action planning and other things like that. So that's fantastic to hear. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Oh, I just did see someone pop up. Here's a question for you, Justin. How many municipalities in Southwest PA are designated as disadvantaged in Southwestern PA, corresponding to the census tracts on CGEST? And actually, I think I answered that. Well, it wasn't the number of municipalities that we had counted, but census tracts based on the CGEST data I'd have to take a closer look to see which municipalities. As you get into more rural areas, those municipalities are much larger and don't include as many people. But we identified 883 census tracts that cover over 3 million residents in Pennsylvania. And the total number of burdens experienced was over 4,635 burdens, but about 883 census tracts. I don't know. There's likely more. Does the EnviroScreen tool use census tracts, Justin?
So yeah, I forgot to mention that. So the EnviroScreen tool actually uses census block groups, which is an even smaller geographic area than census tracts, and it's population based as well. So there are multiple census block groups in one census tract. And so we get even sort of more narrowly defined. And I know for municipalities, if you work for a township, borough, or city, you're interested if your municipality is available for these grants. And often, based on this geography, some of your municipality may be considered for this, and some of it may not. And I think that's intentional to help ensure that even within your municipality, your county, your township, your borough, that the funds are getting directed to those parts of the municipality that are most facing the most environmental burdens or population vulnerability.
That's a good point, and a good emphasis point too, to re-emphasize what Matthew was talking about with regard to engagement and requiring good, solid community engagement as part of any application. So I think that's a good point to maybe end on and to re-emphasize. So thanks so much, Justin. Appreciate. I don't see any other questions coming through. But we would like to thank everybody for joining us. We'd also like to take a moment as a quick reminder to, before we wrap up, to let everybody know that this opportunity is still out there, and we're hoping that folks will register soon. Registration is open for the 2023 Sustainable PA Annual Conference. Will be held in Gettysburg at the Wyndham in Gettysburg. This year's theme is helping communities reach their energy emission reduction goals, and I'm sure that Justice40 will be part of that conversation as well. So from all of us here at Sustainable Pittsburgh, and on behalf of our presenters, Justin and Matthew, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you'll tune in next time for our next policy connection as we dig deeper into these issues. But please feel free to reach out to me or anybody else on the Sustainable Pittsburgh team to connect with any of our speakers and to follow up on any questions you might have on more opportunities. So thank you all, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks, everyone.